Yeah, that's an easy one for me. Um, August 29, 2009, Objective Berlin. That's uh, that's one of the hardest nights to relive. Um, that was the night that Jason Dawkey and Eric Ario died, and uh, Turner was exfilled. Allen was also injured during that night, and it was a tough night because I was young in my career, and the person who shaped the way that I served and the way that I led, who I thought was invincible. He changed my life in regiment, and uh, I it was over in an instant, a blink of an eye, and I was standing there to drag him behind cover.
Yeah.
And so to see that was one, obviously sobering, but two, it was very eye opening how it's eye opening to see how the enemy doesn't discriminate against who they target, and anybody is open to that. And so,
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and today I've got not Jessica Neuert, even though his screen might say that. I've got Nick Neuert, former 175 Ranger. I don't want to date us, but it's been a while now, since he was in regiment. We're all starting to get a little long in the tooth and starting to look at things from a little bit different perspective. But Nick had a really great career in their 75th. Had a little bit of I don't know, I guess you could say a thrown for a little bit of a loop there toward the end of his career when he was going to do something. But I think all things kind of happen for a reason, and we'll talk about that a little bit because I think Nick has a dream job that a lot of us would like. He's up there in Arkansas, opening up the world of the outdoors to veterans and taking veterans and their family members on deer hunts and duck hunts. And it sounds like what most of us, outdoorsmen would want to do on a daily basis. But just a really good person, good husband, good father, good ranger, and doing some great stuff on the other side of the uniform. I'm going to pass it off to Nick and let him introduce himself, and we'll get on with the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Yuma. As you said, Nick Neuert here. Little background on me: born and raised just outside of Dallas. Joined the Army right out of high school. Served in the 75th Ranger Regiment for 12 years. Medically retired. Going on 15 years in marriage this year with Jessica, who I am not. And we got 3 kids, boys 10, daughter 7, and the youngest daughter's 4. We live in Arkansas now, and we're enjoying life.
Well, that's awesome, Nick, and we'll get straight into the reason for this podcast and talking about leadership and vulnerability. And I'll just straight up come out and ask you what's your definition of vulnerability?
Vulnerability to me is allowing your guard to come down, knowingly allowing your guard to come down and assume the risk that you can be attacked from physical, mental, or emotional at any front. And that can be, vulnerability can be a strategic thing. It can be a mental thing, psychological type deal. But I think it's just allowing the guard to come down, knowing that you're exposing yourself to a potential threat.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't really think there's a wrong answer in vulnerability. It kind of everybody has their own little definition and the way they look at it. But I think it's kind of an integral part of life. It's part of growing and maturing and growing as a leader and a husband and a father and a service member and a former service member. It's just kind of part of your life, and you can accept it and use vulnerability to your advantage, or you can push it away and face dark times and not go through some trouble. But I think kind of being vulnerable opens up a lot of, can open you up and help you out in the long run. And we talked a little bit briefly about your service, but I'm just curious, you joined the Army straight out of high school, straight to the 75th. Why the Army? And then why'd you want to go chase that tambourine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the Army right out of high school. It was always a dream of mine to serve. I felt the calling since I was little. I was the kid that ran around in camos and shot, invisible bad guys. And my grandfather was he was in an SF unit during Vietnam, and but sitting down talking to him about his experiences, that really shaped the direction that I wanted to go. And I remember him telling me that if he could go back and again, based off what he saw in his career, there was no one more professional than the Ranger. And that was instantly, I knew who I needed to be and wanted to be. And so that's what I strived for as soon as I joined the military.
Yeah. So, how much time did you spend in the 75th total before you medically retired?
12 years.
So that's obviously a significant chunk. That chunk of time, obviously a very busy time for the regiment during the global war on terrorism. I know you and I shared some of the same dirt over the years in Alpha Company 175. As you look back on it now, from where you sit and what you're doing, and you see all these veterans, and you see former members of former SOF members a lot, former 75th members a lot. What do you remember fondly about your time in the 75th, and what did it mean to you?
It might be a cliche answer, but the most memorable thing for me from my time in service was the brotherhood. And people that are in the service, they, especially in the regiment, everything is so fast paced that you don't really stop to think about the people, and how intertwined everybody is in a platoon, um, emotionally and physically. And then when you separate yourself from that situation, you instantly feel this void in your life, and and so that's the most memorable time, most memorable experience. It was the brotherhood of the people that I served with.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It's all the, and I think it's really easy to do that when you're separate, when you're away from it now, right? When I'm in it,
Yeah.
I miss when I'm doing a training cycle, I miss going on target, or
Yeah.
doing something that's more closely tied to what you do functionally in the organization. But now that I'm removed and you're removed, it's definitely the people. What do you miss most about the people of the organization?
So real quick before I get to the people, I absolutely 100% every day miss going on target. I absolutely miss standing as a jump master in the door, getting ready to send jumpers out. Like those are the things that don't go away,
Right.
and I'm still trying to find how to scratch that itch.
Yep.
But I think the people is a little bit more. So, um, and then all right. So back to your question, what about the people?
Yeah,
Is that
what
what it
is it
was?
about the people in that organization that really kind of, that rings true to kind of all of us, that kind of have that feeling about the people there?
So I think um, for me, it is the professionalism. There is everybody shows up to work like it's the first day on the job, and they are assessing and selecting every day that they come to work. That kind of professionalism doesn't exactly translate into the civilian world. Um, and so there's been a struggle in my transition trying to understand. You go from the constant professional to 60% is acceptable. And that kind of um, made me appreciate the the people that I served with for so long so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I have it written down here, what makes the 75th a great organization. I think we're talking about it right here. It's the people
Yeah.
that you're around every day, and their strive, every day, like you said, is you got to prove yourself every day. When you walk through that door, you got to earn that scroll. So, I couldn't agree more with you. Now, if you look back on that time in the 75th in uniform, what is your most fond memory or something you one of those is there a day or a moment or a mission or maybe even just a conversation with somebody that just kinda you reflect on more often than
Um, there's a lot of very fond memories. To pick one of them is very challenging. I could do the default and say there was a target that I hit that I was just absolutely in love with. It was, executed without any issues, and we had a great time. But I think really the um, some of the more some of the more fond memories are like I was saying earlier, standing in a jump door.
not.
I I thoroughly loved being a jump master, and um, one of the best memories of that was being over at regiment, and we did a family jump. Everybody was there. I was a PJ on a door. Um, Everybody got to see us jump, and so just the combination of getting to do what you love and then having your family there to get to see you do it. And I mean that was a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
really really enjoyed that. So conversations, it's amazing to me some of the how sharp, um, you know, intellectually the some of the people are at
Yeah.
regiment.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to one of the 175 star majors about putting nipper computers at the CQ desk, and he was like, "Absolutely not. We're not going to do that." And then 5 years later, I ran into him again, and he was like, "Hey, Sergeant Neuert, we still don't have nippers at the 175 CQ desk." And the fact that he remembered, because it was one of my 3 ups and 3 downs from staff duty,
Yeah.
and so the fact that he read that and remembered that, I was like, "Man, okay, that's the kind of attention to detail that I need to be putting on everybody else." So that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. You said something there that kind of triggered something I'd never really thought about before. Is there are moments in the regiment that you're talking about with the people and the brotherhood that can be semi recreated in you have an event or you have a bunch of hunters come up that you kind of can rekindle that, but there are things that you can never recreate, which is standing in a jump door, right? There's nothing on earth
right.
in the world you can go do to simulate, especially blacked out, MLAT, jumping into a blacked out DZ, and you're the PJ, or you know just counting somebody. I even get chills when I think about it, counting people onto an aircraft when you're about to go to the X, right? There's things in this second part of our life we
Absolutely.
cannot recreate, and that's the stuff. They're small blips, but they have a huge impact. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. One of the most the biggest tactical voids in my life is, and the thing that you can't recreate, like you're saying, is going wheels down on the X
Yeah,
and being within 300 meters of a target building. The the thought process, the adrenaline rush, the um, the amount of I don't even know what the right word is to use. The amount of comfort that you have, and the guys that are to the left and right of you. There's no way that you could ever recreate landing in front of compound and running out on X. That there's just no way. Um, and and so to kind of you can immerse yourself in people who are like-minded, who have shared those experiences with you, and you can talk about them and relive them, but you can't ever recreate that once it's gone.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Some fond memories there, and along with the fond memories, there's also some difficult memories, and I get a bevy of it, and it's always interesting to me. What memory is it of yours that's you don't really enjoy reliving it, but it still comes and visits you every once in a while?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. Um, August 29, 2009, Objective Berlin. That's uh, that's one of the hardest nights to relive. Um, that was the night that Jason Dawkey and Eric Ario died, and uh, Garner was exfilled. Allen was also injured during that night, um, and it was a tough night because I was young in my career, and the person who shaped the way that I served and the way that I led, who I thought was invincible.
Mhm.
He changed my life in regiment, and uh, I it was over in an instant,
Yeah.
a blink of an eye, and I was standing there to drag him behind cover,
Yeah.
and so to see to see that, um, was one, obviously sobering, but two, it was very eye opening how, um, it's eye opening to see how the enemy doesn't discriminate against who they target, and anybody um, is open to that. And so it's a tough thing. It's tough to talk about. It's
Yeah.
but it's good to talk about it. You know, my son is named after Jason now,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit, it gets easier, and then some days it gets hard again. But
Yeah.
I think it's probably the hardest, darkest night
Yeah.
that I had in the Army.
Yeah, I agree. I have a when Matt was killed, when Commons was killed, I have days where I am overcome with joy about the time I had with him, right?
Absolutely.
And then there are days where I say, "What could I have done different to still make him be here today?" Right? And
Right.
it's not easy, but you know, two great people impacted our lives in a way, and it's I don't think we'll ever get over it, no matter how many the therapists we see and people we talk to. It's just something and it just because it's so instant, it's so instantaneous.
Yep. It absolutely is instantaneous. It was, I mean, at one point he's saying, "Hey, wedge out, we're moving up the ridge," and then at the next point, it was somersaults through the air, and you didn't even hear the gunshot.
Yeah,
So it's like you're just so, and at that point it just became such tunnel vision that everything that was around, um, everything happened seamlessly, obviously, but uh, fire was returned, the squad did what it was supposed to, but everything, the focus kind of changes.
yeah,
It's hard to explain, to people who have never been there, and I think this is a good point that I'd like to bring up. That this right here is a good example of vulnerability, and
yeah,
it is, because it's hard to talk about this kind of stuff, and now, I talk about it more now than I used to. I think because when you're in uniform, vulnerability might mean something a little bit different,
yep,
or it might be perceived a little bit differently. And I I'll be the first one to tell you, life outside is tough, and these things creep back up. Been in some dark places, like some of us have, and uh, but I'm okay to talk about it because
yeah,
I want I'm okay being vulnerable if it'll help somebody else. Uh, but I think when you're in that uniform, allowing yourself to be vulnerable sometimes, uh, kind of comes with the wrong impression.
yeah,
People are afraid that, man, if I go see a psych, or if I go see behavioral health, then that's it for me. I'll be non-deployable anymore because I'll be on some kind of list somewhere, and it'll
right,
say, "Hey, you can't go." And so I think that it's a little bit more challenging to be vulnerable, uh, in uniform than it is outside of the uniform. But at the same time, um, I don't think there's any reason to be that way, because I mean, if you're a career guy,
yeah,
um, you have to keep going. And if you can't be vulnerable a little bit to talk to somebody, then eventually, you're going to run into a situation where you can't get yourself out of.
yeah. And I think now, more than ever, as we're out of the GWAT, sort of. I mean, there's still stuff going on in the world every day that's still tied back to it, but it's important for people to hear these stories and hear things like there's a little thing you said there when Jason was killed, everything kind of went. I mean, you reverted to training, right?
Right.
People are suppressing, people are giving aid, people are moving. The it just goes to show how important all those long nights and things that we do out on Fort Stewart, on Fort Benning, they really do take over, and you see some amazing things when you're put under the gun like that, you know?
It's funny you say that because I couldn't agree more. When any time that you take contact, it always becomes a battle drill, which is,
Yeah,
kind of the it's kind of the deal. And especially when something really bad like that happens, you rely completely on your training. And I'll never forget, I had a platoon sergeant that told me, and I'm sure every sports coach in the world has said it, but um, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And I think the regiment's really good about that because uh, nobody has any problem saying, no, you screwed that up, go
yeah,
back and do it again all night long until it's perfect. And so I do really appreciate, and I might not have appreciated it as much whenever I was a younger guy, but I really did appreciate the fact that the standard was never waived because of time
right.
or impatience, uh, and I think
Yeah,
that's what makes us so successful.
yeah. I agree. I agree. So great career, great time in uniform. So when you went to transition, I remember you were going to go the FBI route. I remember, right? And I had a conversation with
Yep.
you at Fort Benning. I was probably going through RASP again. And you
Hmm.
said that, some stuff came up medically that you weren't expecting. And, you kind of had to pivot and turn out. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about your transition and the evolution of your transition and how it all came about.
Absolutely. I was so the FBI thing was a product of me trying to stay operational after I found out about the medical board. Um, so kind of what happened, 2012 got blown up and hit my head, got my bell rang pretty good. Didn't really think anything of it. Like most Rangers, didn't really talk about it and continued to deploy because that's what we did. And it was 4 years later, 5 years later, I was starting to have, you know, a lot of backlash from from that event. And I went to the doc and I was like, all right, hey, check it out. These are my issues. I need to figure it out. We went and did an MRI. They found a mass on the right frontal lobe of my brain, about the size of a nickel. And they said that it was the brain's version of scar tissue from blunt impact. And it was when I got thrown across the room and hit my head. So when that happened, I was on the dock to go back and take a platoon on the line. And as soon as they found the mass, the Army came down and overrid everything that I had ever thought was going to happen. And they said, "No, you're absolutely done." Um, there was no option for reclass. There was no option for anything. It was, "Hey, you're done. We're going to medically retire you." And so then I said, "Okay, well, if the Army's not going to have me, I've got a bunch of buddies that are up at HRT. I'm going to make a phone call." Got a couple letters of recommendation. That was the route that I was going. Um, I had to submit my medical records to them.
Yeah.
They caught wind of everything that was going on, and they were like, "Well, pump the brakes, man. We can't do this either. We're not going to be liable for this kind of stuff." And so the medical retirement happened.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of from start to finish, soup to nuts. It was about 6 months.
Fast.
And so it was extremely fast and it was a life changing event. I went from assuming that I was going to be operational for 20, 25 years to 6 months later looking for a job as a civilian.
Right.
And the Army tries to do their best during that ACAT process to get you ready for that kind of stuff. But it is so, it is so much different than anything that they could have prepared me for, especially leaving, regiment that quickly. It was it was a it was a whirlwind, that's for sure.
Yeah, what were some of your emotions there? Was it confused? Were you mad? Were you mad at the Army? Mad at,
Oh,
the I mean, just kind of I mean, that's fast, 6 months, you go from, you
yeah.
know I know who you are. Everybody who's watching this, listening to this knows who you are. You're 100 miles an hour all the time to you've got to pivot your whole life, and you didn't really seem like you had a lot of say in it. Just what'd you go through there?
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of say in it. And I was actually I was not going to. I tried. When the when the surgeon said, "Hey, we should go do this MRI because I've got a bad feeling," I was almost like, I'm not going to make that appointment, doc.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to happen." But I really did need to. I did need to go and get it checked, and so I did. And when I finally found out that there was nothing that I could do, um, it was heartbreaking, to say the least. The My initial reaction was I was livid that I had listened to doc to go
Yeah.
get checked out, and I was really upset that I did, because I didn't want the outcome to be the way that it was. And then after the initial anger wore off, it was heartbreak. And then whenever I signed out on um, terminal leave, it was it was panic, because I had moved back to Texas, and the three jobs that I had lined up as contracting didn't pan out, and so then it was just mass chaos trying to figure out what I was going to do before leave ended.
Yeah.
So
The,
it was a roller coaster of emotions.
and
Um,
and I think I mean, something we're really not mentioning here is there's a family aspect to this too. Not only is your whole career getting turned upside down, but now stability is gone. Like a family, uncertainty is terrible when you have a family, right? When you don't know what's going on, it can create all kinds of issues. How did you guys kind of get through it together?
so the family aspect of it is, and probably was, the most challenging part of it. And I mean, we had a we had a my daughter was not even a year old when we transitioned, and so transitioning from from kind of where we were to not having a house or a job or anything lined up, and not from a lack of trying, just from the sheer being thrown into it, kind of into the fire. There was stress, there was a little bit of turmoil, there was a couple long nights where we just kind of sat there and cried and figured out how we were gonna find our way in life. Thankfully, my wife is very much like I am in terms of, um, we're going to give this 100%, and we're going to figure out what's going to make it work. And so I took a steel construction job. I was like, you know what? I've got a friend. He does labor work. I will make money, and I will work whatever job I have to as an interim until I am able to land something that is more permanent. And so that's what we did. And, we just kind of teamed up, and we said, all right, if you want me to take out the trash, I'm taking out the trash. It's gonna put food on the plate for the kids.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And that's tough. That's tough going from, um, knowing that the check from the government's coming every week, to now knowing,
Right.
I get paid by uh, another individual who has to secure work in order for me to work.
Right.
And so there's a lot of uncertainty there, a
Yeah.
lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I've had a few people on the podcast that have been through the medical process, and that I think that's a whole. We could talk about that for an hour. All your lessons learned and everything you
sure.
did there in your transition. But if you could give, one big lesson learned or one big piece of advice you learned in your transition, whether it refers to the med board itself or transition as a
Yeah.
whole, or even as a family, as a father, what it is, what's one thing you look back on and wish you knew, or wish you could tell somebody going through it?
Uh, as far as the transition process goes on the medical side of it, it's just like anywhere else. Know your worth. Know that know what is going on inside your body, um, and if they're not rating you or evaluating you correctly, raise your hand and say something, because you do have a voice in your rating.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have known that earlier on, because then we would have been much better off, and I wouldn't have had to have fought so hard afterwards. It's a lot easier to get it done the first time during your transition than it is to come back and fight for the correct rating. Um, so because that process, you're by yourself. You don't have an
Yeah.
advocate. It takes a long time. So if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, as long as you get a 0% placeholder, you can go back and get your rating changed." Yeah, no, absolutely not. If you got a 0% placeholder, you need to go back in there, talk to the medical board, talk to the evaluator, get a new evaluator. And if your knee's blown out and hurt, and like you wake up in the morning and you stiff leg all the way to the bathroom, yeah, you need more than a 0% rating, and you can get it, um, and do so before you transition, because it's much easier to do it
Yeah.
during your transition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Father, family, husband, advice. Um, Everybody says have a plan A, plan B, have a tertiary plan. Man, I'm telling you what, have a fourth and a fifth one as well, because my first three didn't pan out. And um, when you're in the military and you're surrounded by service members, your lifestyle, your personality, the way that you speak, the way that you command, the way that you lead, it's all normal and it's all expected. When you become a civilian, none of those things translate the same way it does for the civilian world. You don't talk the same way as people, you don't lead the same way. And so as a leader of your family, you have to be able to adapt, and you have to be moldable into your new environment.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, then it makes everything else in the rest of your life so much more difficult.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Great advice. And that brings us kind of what you're doing now. And I'd be curious how, you go from still working to working for Darby Warrior Support, and how that all came to be. And, um, what's, I just speak about a little bit what you're doing now and what DWS is all about.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it kind of started whenever service. I was invited to come out on a hunt with DWS, and it was exactly what I didn't know I needed. Um, at the time I was working at RASP 2, and I was burning the candle at both ends there. It was I didn't realize how much I needed just a reset, and so I came out on a hunt with DWS, and it absolutely changed the way that I operated at working at home. And just because it was the reset, it mentally, physically reset. Um, Medical board takes place, and Dennis Smith asks me, "Hey, you want to come out here and help seasonally, in the winter?" And I was like, "Man, I really appreciate it, but I already have this thing called the FBI lined up, and that's what I'm going to do." And so I turned it down, and thinking that I was going to continue to be operational, and then that didn't happen. And so I called Dennis back, and I was like, "Hey, Dennis, you still got that position?" He was like, "Yeah, no, man, that we filled it already." And I was like, "Well, that's not good." But so fast forward to 2018, during my I retired, medically retired September of 18. I called Dennis, asked him if he wanted me to help. He said no, but I have a hunt for you. And I was like, man, that's great. I will come and I'll use all of my sick days. I'll use all of my vacation days um, to help out and just volunteer my time to it. So that's what I did. I brought a group in. Just tried to help out as much as I could. And I told Dennis, I was like, hey, look, okay, if anything changes, I'm your guy. So you need to call me first. And May of 19, that's what happened. He was like, hey, we need another operations manager, or we need an operations manager. And I'm giving you a call if you want it. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. When you want me to start? He said next month. I said, I'll be there next week. And I commuted for the first 2 months from Texas, stayed in Arkansas, 4 days a week, working, looking for a place. And we were so certain of the move because of the mission out here that I looked at Jessica and I was like, this is a God thing. We have to go. And she was like, yeah, we absolutely have to go. And so that's what we did. We picked up, and 10 months after landing in a house in Texas, we, picked everything up and moved to Arkansas.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I want to get into a little bit about DWS's mission and, the healing power of the outdoors and kind of what that means to you and what you've seen it do to some of the people that are visiting. And I'll just share, we were talking a minute ago about recreating some of those things like going to the X and stuff. And I'll share, I hunted growing up in New Mexico and then, joined the Army. I didn't really hunt much. I didn't understand this tree stand thing out here on the east side. I was used to glassing and spotting and stalking. And then, I got a bow one winter, and I went up to my, the family lived in Atlanta, and somebody had some land and put me in a deer stand. And I had an encounter, killed a buck with a bow, and it was the closest I'd ever come, like heart rate rise to a gunfight was that whole experience of killing that deer. And I fell back in love with hunting, and it was really great for me, like mental health wise. It gave me an outlet that was other than work, which was 24/7, squad leader years, platoon sergeant years. And I really credit hunting in the outdoors was kind of helping me refine myself during those darker times. And, I had a great experience at DWS with my son. He still talks about it all the time and pokes fun at himself for missing all the ducks that he missed and says, man, I really want to I really want to try that again, Dad. He says that almost every year when we talk about it. So I think there's something to be said about the outdoors, and especially for people who have never hunted or never been out there. I wouldn't, if you get the opportunity to go up to DWS, go immediately, go for the camaraderie and just getting out there. And it takes all of your senses to hunt birds, it's just something that you can't recreate that. And it'll fill a void in your life that you never knew. And I want to pass it off to you. Just to kind of talk about the DWS mission and everything that I just talked about, what it kind of means to you.
Absolutely. So the DWS mission, it says that we provide physically and emotionally injured post 9/11 special operations combat veterans on all-inclusive guided Arkansas hunting and fishing opportunities in an environment that comforts, encourages, and fosters rehabilitation and recovery and transition. So, okay, with that being said, it's an opportunity for guys who have shared hard experiences to come and sit down in an environment where you are not judged and where it is okay to let your guard down, let your hair down, step away from the flagpole for a little bit for the active duty guys and just let it out. And that is different for every single person. We have some people who come in and they talk it out. We have some people who come in and they cry it out. We have some people who come in um, and they're reserved, and by the end of the weekend, they're chipped, they're happy, they're talkative. So it looks different to everybody, but to recreate some of those senses that you talked about, that's exactly why we chose the venue that we did. Sitting in a duck blind before the sun comes up when it's pitch black is very similar to starting actions on an objective. There's a lot of prep that goes into it. You have, backwards planning on your timeline, all of the setup that goes into it, prepping the objective, and then there's the actions on. That's when the birds start to fly. And then it's action packed, it's in your face, but it also comes intermittently. So there's downtime where you get to talk, BS with your buddies, give them crap for missing a shot. And then all of a sudden the birds are in it again and you're switched on. It's reflexive fire, which is very familiar for everybody. And then it's over again. And so the ebbs and flows of the adrenaline rush and the conversation that happens in a duck blind amongst four friends, right? And that's really, you get to see God's work. You get to see, the creation out there, the sunrise, the beauty of the birds, how everything ties together. And it's very magical and it's very healing for a lot of people. And then there's the camaraderie at the lodge after the hunt, sitting around the table, breaking bread together, sitting by the fire in the living room or outside by the fire pit, talking about war stories, talking about hard times. So the combination of the hunt and the downtime is really where people start to feel more comfortable opening up. And it's nice to open up to somebody who's been there and done that. Everybody at DWS has served in a soft unit at some point in their career. And so talking to or amongst us is familiar and easy versus sitting in a VA talking to a psych who's never been outside the continental United States.
Yeah. So what part is it about the experience when you have a group there that is when they kill their first duck, or is there like these light bulb moments that you have that make your job? Because there's a lot of hours you're putting in before anybody even shows up to this thing that a lot of people probably don't know about, that you're sitting there grinding and doing. So what is your reward for all this professionally when you see all these guys and gals come in?
So you're absolutely right. I have got buddies that duck hunt, and they are crazy about duck hunting, and it's a 60-day season. And I always tell them, it's 60 days for you. It's 365 days for me. It's a year-long prep for us. But the reward to it is when I see people have the same reaction that I had, because we do father-son deer hunts, and when a son shoots his first deer and it is the most excited, moment of his life, it's also that for the dad too. And that might be something that he's not getting because of training cycles and deployments. And so for us to be able, because they might not have time to take care of a deer lease or know how to take care of a deer lease. And so for us to be able to provide that opportunity, that venue, and for them to share that experience together, seeing the reaction on that dad's face, a barrel-chested freedom fighter who's, teary-eyed because his son is shaken uncontrollably because they just shot their first deer. That right there that's the icing on the cake for me. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then in the duck um, in the duck woods, it's the same thing. We I had a group. We had probably a couple thousand ducks that were in the water swimming around us before shooting light. And I tell these guys, "Hey, shoot that duck!" And nobody shoots their gun because they're just enamored by the beauty of what they're witnessing. Um, and and then, I mean, all these birds, just shy of 2,000 ducks, flies out of the hole, and we didn't kill any of them. And I'm like, me as a hunter, I'm like, oh my gosh, we could have been done in like 3 minutes. But the the magic that was taking place was so much more invaluable to these guys, and
Yeah.
it was so to hear them talk about what they witnessed, and then to hear them relate it to stresses and issues, and hear them say, all right, this was the best thing that's ever happened. I'm going home to buy decoys, a gun, and some waders. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. That's exactly what
Yeah.
I'm looking for. And I also offer them, you know, the number to a jag attorney, because if they're going home to buy a bunch of shotguns, waders, and decoys, there's a good chance that their wife's going to be upset, and because it's a very expensive hobby.
Yeah.
No, but that is that's the that's the beauty for me,
Yeah.
is being able to continue to serve the community, um, and to be as close to the community and help those that I served with, in any way that I can, and this is the way that I can. So, uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
awesome stuff. And then from another perspective, so I've seen some social media posts of you and your son hunting. I put some stuff up there
mhm,
of me and my kids when we're out there in the woods, and I'll have people ask me how they get into this, or why do you do this? Uh,
mhm,
I think there's a bevy of. I mean, I think it's just such a great bonding experience. It's teaching. There's a lot of life skills that are in hunting that people that are ignorant to it never try to learn and figure out. But it makes me a better father to do that stuff with my kids. And I just want your perspective from another outdoorsman and hunter. What does hunting and outdoors mean to you as a parent, as a dad that's doing it?
it it is it's an incredible opportunity for me to sit down one on one with each one of the kids, if we're in a deer stand or something, and really get into the weeds with them on how life is going. We get so wrapped up in life at the house. We have a routine, we have a schedule. It's, you come home, you do your homework, we're getting dinner ready, we're eating dinner, when we do bedtime routine. And sometimes I think that we get so involved in our routines that we don't stop and talk to, each other about things that we're experiencing outside of, the actual just day to day stuff. So sitting in a blind with the kids is it's awesome, because you have opportunity with no distractions. There's no electronics. There's nothing going on, and you can really get into the weeds with, hey, how are your friends? How's school going? How's soccer? Do you enjoy this? Do you enjoy that? And it's a really good opportunity for me to mentor them, and get to know them
Yeah,
on a much more personal level. And I said it's hard to say get to know your kids on a more personal level, but really that's what it is.
yeah,
You get to explain to them and teach them and talk to them about everything.
yeah,
Um, and then you see the sunrise, when I see the sunrise, I'm like, man, that's gorgeous. I wish, fill in the blank, Jason could see this with me. I
yeah.
wish Jessica could see this with me. I wish Emily was there, because they would really like this one. And when I take them, they get to experience it and they get to see those things. So
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I think that's what hunting means to me on that.
And I think the golden nugget isn't in there is what you didn't say. It's not about the kill, right?
No,
It's not.
no,
That's a cherry on top, and that's a whole nother
yeah,
thing of understanding where your food comes from and how to respectfully and honorably take your game and process it and know where all of that's a whole nother side of the story. But you didn't mention any of that. It's about that time that quiet time that you can just that you're just together, right? There's
Yep.
nowhere else to be physically, emotionally except right there. And I think that's you hit the nail on the head. And as we bring in and kind of start to land this plane, two more things for you. How can people support DWS that are listening? What's the best way to do it?
If you're looking to support, there's really two types of support that we ask. One is financial support. It takes a lot of backing to be able to host the quality hunts that we do for two groups every weekend from October to February, and so we need help with that. Just right up front, out of the gate, we need donations, and you can do that on. There's links on all of our social media for that. We have a website, and that's really really important, because that allows us to continue operations. And then the second kind of donation that we also do is volunteer work. We have 2 volunteer work days a year where anybody who wants to come and help out can show up, and we spend 3 to 5 days on each one of these work weeks, and we get some of the heavy lifting done that I can't do by myself, or Sean and I can't do together, that takes multiple hands, brushing blinds, that kind of stuff. Something that's going to take me 3 weeks to do on a work week we can get it knocked out in a couple of days. So those are really the 2 most important ways to donate or to give back to us.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, that the way to know when those volunteer days are is you follow you guys on social media. You're on all the social media and your website, and you'll post when those
Yep.
times are coming up, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Please do follow us on social media, because that is our venue for distributing information. And you can go to the website and reach out to us, send us an email, and we can put you on a distro. And so we'll do a quarterly newsletter that has all of the upcoming events and all of the stuff like that you can participate in. So if social media is not your thing, go to the website, send us an email. We'll get you put on our distro list and get you connected that way too.
All right, last question. I got my little buddy walking in here saying it's time to wrap it up, Dad. But I'm going to ask the kids. You can't, you know the deal. We talked about it before. You never know what's going to happen when you got a house full of kids. But if you could go back
That's right.
and you could talk to Private Neuert and give him one piece of advice, what would it be?
Gosh, one piece of advice for Private Neuert. I don't know. There's a lot of advice Private Neuert could have probably benefited from. I think one piece of advice, probably the most important thing is, and I'll try to leave some names out of this, but I had a leader who said you can only do 2.5 things well,
Mhm.
and yeah, you know exactly what I'm saying here. And so you have to pick what those 2.5 things are. And as a young Ranger, I did not manage my 2.5 things very well. So pick the things that are the most important to you, top 3, and just understand that the first 2 things you can do those well, and then that third thing you can only do it about half, about 50%, and everything else is going to have to be okay the way that it is. And so to really evaluate what those 2.5 things are that you want to be an expert at, and pour into those, because it will shape everything else in the future.
Yep, absolutely right. I know that piece of advice, and I use it well, and then distribute that to as many people as I can. Nick, thanks for the time here on the Thanksgiving week, and to everybody that comes out there and visits you, and you happy hunting.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep.